and everyone else out there that is trying to do something to help eliminate poverty. Your 10-20-30 plan was really hailed as something that we should all take a closer look at. It was a bipartisan approach and a look at poverty because it affected so many different people's districts. And just want to thank you for being an advocate in this area. And now I'd like to call up my colleague from the great state of California, Karen Bass. Karen Bass also is someone that really takes these topics seriously. She's always been someone that's delved very deeply into the budget and to domestic spending and how it impacts our communities, and just really appreciate her taking part to really share what we think is important as it relates to this budget. And Representative Bass, the floor is yours. Again, thank you for participating.
Thank you, Mr. VC, and also thank you, Ms. Dimmings, for your leadership in this hour. I know that our theme is, what do we have to lose? That's something that the president, during his campaign, asked the African-American community. What do you have to lose? Why don't you think about voting Republican this time? So I was a part of the group that Mr. Clyburn referred to that went and met with the president last week. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus Executive Committee met with the president, and we went over to the White House to answer the question, what do we have to lose? As my colleagues that have spoken before me mentioned, we believe that we have a lot to lose, and I think that the budget is a reflection of all that we have to lose. As my colleague Val Deming said, a budget is a reflection of your values. It's a reflection of where you think taxpayers' money should be spent. And so in the opportunity that I had to speak with the president, I mentioned to him that I was sure that he was aware that in the United States, over 2 million people are incarcerated. In fact, we incarcerate more people in the United States than any other country on the planet. What I told him that he probably wasn't aware of was that this was an issue, a bipartisan, bicameral issue that members of Congress in both houses were looking at, because we've recognized over the years that incarceration is not the solution to communities that are experiencing crime. We told him that there was a trend in Congress to actually reconsider policies that led to over-incarceration. We told him that the Congressional Black Caucus was concerned about messages that we'd heard from him, one that is reflected in his budget, two that was reflected in his New Deal for Black America, where the focus was on law and order. We told him that we were concerned about his proposals to address problems in poor communities, and our chair, Cedric Richmond, specifically pointed out that he was concerned about the way African-American communities were consistently described as riddled by violence and as almost uninhabitable. We told him that we thought he probably wasn't aware that 95% of prisoners return to communities, and that maybe he was not aware that many of these inmates return to certain zip codes. If you have a community in certain zip codes where a number of people have been released from prison without any services, then naturally you are going to have a problem with recidivism. We have people coming out of prison who then find out that they are prohibited from working, that they're ineligible for public benefits, including even a driver's license. In the state of California, we had a program in state prisons where we trained you to be a barber, but then we didn't allow you to have a license if you had been a prisoner. So we had to change state law to change that. We told him that if we don't find ways to reintegrate people into society, that he needed to understand that that was actually a contributing factor to crime and violence in many communities. When we went to the White House, we didn't just go to point out problems, but we also went to talk about solutions. And here is the concern when it comes to the budget. The budget that the president delivered to Congress so far is so general that we don't know whether or not some of the cuts to discretionary spending would include programs like the Second Chance Act. The Second Chance Act is a program that provides funding to states to address and reduce recidivism. The Second Chance Act are programs that work with inmates before they are released to address the root causes of why they offended in the first place. So people in prison, a large percentage, did not graduate high school. So services that are provided by the Second Chance Act include employment services, mental health, substance abuse, housing, education, and family reunification. As we talked about a budget being a reflection of your values, for the values to me that would help the African American community, we need to make sure that the Second Chance Act is fully funded. We won't know what's fully funded in the president's budget until he sends us more details in the month of May. But it's my hope that he listened to the presentations that members of the Congressional Black Caucus made when we had a meeting with him last week, and that when the budget comes out in May, we will see that the Second Chance Act is fully funded. I yield back.
Representative Bass, thank you very much for your comments and remarks. I really appreciate you always taking this subject and task very seriously and to heart. And Mr. Speaker, I have a parliamentary inquiry. I wanted to ask you how much time we have remaining.
We have 26 minutes remaining.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, now I would like to invite my friend from Pennsylvania, Representative Dwight Evans, who has really made this, again, one of his priorities also. Philadelphia is one of those cities where many people have benefited by a lot of these domestic spending programs, students included, like I talked about a little bit earlier. Now I would like to hear from my esteemed colleague from the state of Pennsylvania, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his leadership, along with my classmate, who is also a very fantastic person. So I thank both of you for your leadership in terms of the Congressional Black Caucus and exactly what that means. My colleague from Florida said that budgets are values. Something you may not know, I spent 36 years in the Pennsylvania legislature. And of those 36 years, I spent 28 years on the Appropriation Committee and 20 of the 28 years as the chairman of that committee. So my colleague from Florida is absolutely correct that it's put your money where your mouth is, and that sets a tone of what you believe and what you think. The president proposed budget puts America middle neighborhoods at greater risk, tilting towards decline. And what do I mean by middle neighborhoods? Middle neighborhoods are the neighborhoods that are caught between growth and decline. Neighborhoods that with just a little love and a little help, you can keep those neighborhoods, and those neighborhoods are all over America. Those are communities that we should value. We should understand that affordable housing, stable communities, those neighborhoods are very important to the backbone of America. So these America middle neighborhoods are neighborhoods we should relish, and we should value the importance of these communities. But under this proposed budget, they do not give our seniors, our children, or our working families a chance to get ahead. Major cuts, Mr. Speaker, funds for federal student services, such as LIHEAP, grants for after-school programs, community development block grants, community service block grants, and others to help families and help raise them out of Pennsylvania poverty. Last week, Mr. Speaker, I met with students from the Pennsylvania Trio Gear Up and Upper Bound programs. President Trump's budget proposed cuts for millions of these programs, which support first-time generation college students through outreach to low-income and minority middle high school students. This is our future. This is our future. We are in the 21st century, and we understand if we are to be very competitive in the world, we must leave no child behind. It's important, Mr. Speaker, to recognize that the investments we're talking about benefits all of us. If we want a strong economy, these middle neighborhoods are essential. These middle neighborhoods are where people grow and develop. They go on to college, they do well in school, and they hold our society together. The president's budget undermines and cuts the crucial investments we have made in our cities and our neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that we all come from, neighborhoods that we all recognize the importance of these communities. We should not take this for granted because the reality, as my colleague said from Florida, our values are where our dollars are. And I totally agree with her. Because she is really telling us all that you can pay now or you can pay later. It is better to pay on the front end rather than the back end. It is better to understand that these communities are communities that help America be what it is today. The president's budget undermines and cuts the critical investments. The president's budget does not give our cities the adequate resources to invest in our communities and move our cities in the wrong direction. I think that the president, as my colleague just said earlier, says, what do we have to lose? Well, we have a lot to lose under this proposed budget. This budget is no new deal for Black America. Matter of fact, this is no deal at all. We clearly understand that this means cut in health care, education, affordable housing, and food nutritional programs. This is no deal because we understand that we must make investment. If we're talking about moving America forward and we're talking about making it what we know it can be in terms of America, we must make this investment. But we cannot make these investments. We cannot be talking out both sides of our mouths. We cannot on one hand say, what do we have to lose? And then on the other hand, do nothing in the budget whatsoever. So it's clear, Mr. Speaker, that we have a missed opportunity here. But I'm proud to stand as a member of the Congressional Black Caucus and join with all of my colleagues, as the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus would say, as being the conscience of the Congress. It is important to understand that we don't take that lightly. That's why we stand here today, Mr. Speaker. We stand here to raise the voice, to stress to people that we're not going to give up, that we recognize that we all have a responsibility and an obligation in this democracy, that this is our democracy, and it is something that we should never take for granted. We have a lot to lose. We stand to lose everything that have made our neighbors stronger block by block. So, Mr. Speaker, I stand here with all of my colleagues to carry this message to everyone, that we're never going to give up. Never, never, never. I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Evans, thank you very much. I really appreciate your thoughtfulness and your participation on this topic. And now I'd like to invite my colleague, who is known as a fighter in her district, not only on these domestic spending issues and not only in her district, but throughout the entire United States. And that is my colleague from Los Angeles County, Maxine Waters. Very happy that she's participating. I know that she's been very vocal about these developments, dealing with the budget and dealing with other issues that are facing us here in Washington, D.C., and really appreciate her participating in tonight's discussion.
Thank you very much. I do appreciate the time that I'm being allotted here this evening, joining with my colleagues in the Congressional Black Caucus to answer the question that was posed to us by this president. I rise to answer President Trump's question to the Black community. Now, all throughout his campaign, President Trump declared that Black people all across this country just live in hell and fear each day, and we may be shot on the street. Basically said we have nothing, our education is no good, on and on and on. And then he went on to say that only he can solve the challenges African Americans face. Unfortunately, this kind of talk is typical of this president: boasting, bragging, making promises. This president will say anything, promise anything, of course, with no intention of living up to his promises. One should not believe anything he has to say. As a matter of fact, the African American community understands very well when these kind of empty promises are made. As a matter of fact, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that the presidents of the historically black colleges and universities organized, put together a proposal, and they went to meet with the president at the White House. They didn't even have an opportunity to present the proposal. They were just ushered around in a photo op, and that was all that happened, without any real conversation, without any proposals being produced. And so they were treated in a disrespectful way. And this basically is what I've decided we can expect from the president. His budget and policy priorities reveal his true intentions and what so many of us already know about this president. He really doesn't care about the issues facing the African American community, and he doesn't care to learn about those issues or advance any meaningful legislation to provide jobs and economic opportunities for our nation's most vulnerable communities. If you take a look at Trump's HUD budget, you find a $6 billion reduction. He wants to eliminate the Community Development Block Grant Program, which supports our cities and various urban renewal projects. He wants to eliminate the Home Investment Partnership Program. This president wants to eliminate the Choice Neighborhood Program, and he wants to eliminate the Home Ownership Program, and on and on and on. And just last week, this president tried and failed to repeal the Affordable Care Act. If that unconscionable bill had passed, 14 million people would have lost insurance coverage next year, and the American people would have seen billions in dollars in Medicaid cuts. Trump's empty promises do not end with the budget. He has also filled his cabinet with millionaires and billionaires who don't have a clue about the challenges facing the African American community. Trump's Treasury Secretary was known as the foreclosure king, who profited off of the backs of vulnerable homeowners during the 2008 recession. Trump's education secretary knows nothing about public education, did not attend public schools, children didn't attend public schools, and was not chosen to repair public education. She has chosen to break it. Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who lied under oath before the Senate, opposed the Violence Against Women Act, and he has taken hardline positions against our efforts to reform the criminal justice system, which disproportionately incarcerates African Americans. But of course, we knew about his background and his history and what he is known for, and that is discrimination, disrespect for African Americans. Mr. Speaker, my position against this president and his administration is clear. I oppose this president. I do not honor this president. I do not respect this president. He has disrespected the office and offended so many people across this country and around the world with his disgusting and indecent rhetoric against women, the black community, Muslims, immigrants, and disabled Americans. Mr. Speaker, it is not just the African American community who will lose under this president. It is everyone who isn't a millionaire or billionaire that stands to lose under this administration. I will continue to oppose him and fight him every step of the way. And while I'm talking about where he has put his priorities, and of course, I think the budget really does reflect your priorities. He's reduced the education budget by $13 $9 billion less than last year. $168 billion increase for charter schools, 50% above current levels. Let's take a look at labor. Reduces the budget by 21%, $2.5 billion decrease from last year. Health and Human Services decreased funding by $15 billion, the lowest in 20 years. Reducing funding for the National Institute of Health by 19%. Environmental Protection Agency reduces the budget by 31%, from $8.1 million to $5.7 billion. I'm sorry, $8.1 billion to $5.7 billion. Housing and Urban Development, again, reducing the budget by just about $6 billion, 13.2%. Claims he cares about small business, reduces SBA budget by 5%, $43.2 billion less than last year. And it goes on and on and on. Homeland Security increases the budget by only 6.8% to $44 billion, even though he claims that he cares a lot about the security of this country. What am I saying? I'm simply saying that African Americans have struggled and fought historically. Many African Americans have paid a huge price fighting for justice and equality in this country, have died for it. I don't have to call the names of Martin Luther King and all of the others. We have paid a price, we have fought, but guess what? Despite the fact that America has not always been there for us, we've always been there for America. We have fought in America's wars. We have suffered discrimination. We've suffered isolation and undermining, but we stand up for America oftentimes when others who think they're more patriotic, who say they're more patriotic, do not. When we fight against this president and we point out how dangerous he is for this society and for this country, we're fighting for the democracy. We're fighting for America. We're saying to those who say they're patriotic, but they turn a blind eye to the destruction that he's about to cause this country. You're not nearly as patriotic as we are. We not only have fought in America's wars, have stood up for America, have been there whenever this country was threatened in any way. And we say now that this country is threatened with a president who does not belong there, a president who does not understand how this government works, a president who goes down to Mar-a-Lago every weekend and plays golf. He's not huddling with the members of Congress and trying to figure out how to form a consensus, but rather he's thought he could come in here and run roughshod over everybody. But that's how he works. That's how he acts. He's not good for America. African Americans know this. The Black Caucus understands this. And for those members of the Black Caucus representing our leadership who went to meet with him, they have laid out to him all of this, what our care and concerns are all about. But in the final analysis, we really don't expect anything from him. And my mission and my goal is to make sure that he does not remain president of the United States of America. I yield back the balance of my time.
Representative Waters, thank you very much for your comments on this very timely matter. Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry on how much time we have remaining.
The gentleman has 9 1/4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd also like to add to the record 2 members that were not able to make it. One member that was not able to make it, my neighbor from the 30th Congressional District in Texas, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson.
The gentleman's request will be covered under general leave.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And now I'd like to invite the gentleman from Virginia, my good friend, Bobby Scott, who's also a leader on education issues and domestic spending. Representative Scott, thank you very much for participating tonight.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your good work on this budget. Mr. Speaker, the budget is about choices, and those choices involve arithmetic. Apparently, the Republican strategy on the budget does not recognize arithmetic, because when you start with a deficit, their strategy to deal with the deficit is to increase defense spending and to pass massive tax cuts that will not end up helping the deficit. As we have seen with the choice in health care, they made bad choices. Whatever you think about the Affordable Care Act, their plan was demonstrably worse. Their plan would increase the number of people uninsured by 24 million, higher prices, and worse policies, but tax cuts for millionaires. What I couldn't understand was not what were the ups and downs of politics, but who was for that? 24 million more uninsured, higher prices, and worse policies. Democrats will work with Republicans to improve the Affordable Care Act, but we're not going halfway and say only 12 million uninsured and slightly higher prices and slightly worse policies. If we're going to have a policy to make to increase the number of insured, lower prices, and better policies, will work. We can also produce a better budget. For almost an hour, we've heard the problems with the budget introduced by the President of the United States. The Congressional Black Caucus is not just about complaints. We have a budget, and it's a responsible budget. We make choices, and the choices avoid those devastating cuts that we've heard about. This Congressional Black Caucus budget is realistic. It requires $3.9 trillion in additional revenues, but it outlines over $10 trillion in choices that could be made to come up with that money. Possibilities like cancel the Bush tax cuts, that's $3.9 trillion right off the bat. There are over $10 trillion in total choices. First, with that revenue, we cancel the sequester both for non-defense and for defense. Then we make investments in the future of American families with investments in education, job-creating infrastructure, the environment, scientific research, and maintain a strong social safety net. And in the end, we reduce the deficit by a cumulative amount over $2 trillion reduction in the deficit. So let's be clear. We're going to make choices with the budget. Choices like we made a few years ago. People say a lot about the proposal by Senator Bernie Sanders, $900 billion for free college. Could we afford that? Well, just think a couple of years ago, we passed with one vote an extension in tax cuts, $3.9 trillion. We could have, with the same amount of money, extended $3 trillion in tax cuts, and with the money left over, free college. But we didn't make that choice. All 3.9 went to tax cuts. The 0.9 could have gone to free college. So make no mistake about it, we're making choices. And this year, again, we'll make choices with our budget. Massive tax cuts, or we can focus on a better future and produce a more humane and responsible budget. I would hope that this year we make the right choice. I yield back.
Representative Scott, thank you very much. And as we get ready to close out this special order hour, before I get ready to close it out, I do want to thank my colleague from Florida, Representative Val Demings, for participating, and wanted her to just share some last words on this subject. What do we have to lose? I appreciate your comments earlier and know that you had a few more things that you wanted to share with everybody.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I spent 27 years in law enforcement, and I realized early in my career that we could not arrest our way out of the challenges that we face, that we had to address some of the social ills that cause decay in communities in the first place if we're going to make those communities better. In 1965, President Lyndon Johnson commissioned a group to look at crime in America. I'd like to share just a short paragraph of their report. It says, every effort must be made to strengthen the family. Now, from shattered by the grinding pressures of the slums. Slum schools must be given enough resources to make them as good as schools elsewhere, and to enable them to compensate for the various handicaps suffered by the slum child, to rescue him from his environment. Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that we are still trying to rescue children that particular child represents from their at-risk environments. If we're going to put America first, it starts with putting the American people first. I yield back to my colleague from Texas. Thank you.
Representative Demings, thank you very much for your words, for your inspiration, and really appreciate your perspective again. Now you're getting an opportunity to see this as a member of Congress, but the 27 years that you spent in law enforcement, it gave you a bird's eye perspective on what happens when we don't invest in education, when we don't invest in health care, when we don't invest in things that help families uplift themselves and give themselves opportunity to pull one another out of poverty. And just want to thank you again for participating in tonight's special order hour. And Mr. Speaker, we have a lot to talk about because we do have a lot to lose. With that, I yield back the balance of my time and thank everybody for participating this evening.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you. Members are reminded to refrain from engaging in personalities towards the president. Does the gentleman from Texas have a motion?
Order to adjourn, Mr. Speaker.
So the question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate. House is adjourned.
The House is gavelled out, but earlier members debated and passed 3 bills, including one that would require FEMA to report to Congress on its plans for assisting and informing those affected by an emergency or disaster. Tomorrow in the House, debate and votes on a disapproval resolution that repeals an Obama administration FCC privacy rule for Internet service providers. Follow the House live here on C-SPAN when members return Tuesday at 10 a.m. Eastern for morning speeches and noon for legislative work. The American-Israel Public Affairs Committee, known as AIPAC, is meeting in Washington this week. We'll bring you some of that conference next on C-SPAN. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the Justice Department is following through on an executive order to withhold federal grants from so-called sanctuary cities, which are places where local law enforcement limit their cooperation with federal authorities on immigration enforcement. U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said today the U.S. will boycott UN talks to ban nuclear weapons. Later, the Senate Judiciary Committee postpones a vote on Supreme Court nominee Neil Gorsuch. C-SPAN's Washington Journal, live every day, with news and policy issues that impact you. Coming up Tuesday morning, Tax Foundation economist Kyle Pomerleau will frame the upcoming congressional debate on tax reform and examine Democratic, Republican, and bipartisan proposals. Then North Carolina Republican Congressman Walter Jones and California Democratic Congressman John Garamendi will join us to discuss a bill they co-sponsored calling for a complete withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. Be sure to watch C-SPAN's Washington Journal, live at 7 a.m. Eastern, Tuesday morning. Join the discussion. Vice President Mike Pence also spoke to the AIPAC conference. He talked Sunday about moving the U.S. Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which he said the Trump administration is considering. This is 20 Minutes.
President Lillian Pincus, Ambassador Ron Dermer, members of Congress, Israeli ministers, members of the Knesset, distinguished guests, friends, and fellow Americans. It is great to be back to AIPAC, the largest and most influential gathering of the Friends of Israel in the United States. And it is my great privilege to speak before you tonight on behalf of a true friend of Israel, a courageous defender of freedom, the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. Thanks to the support of so many in this room, President Trump won a historic victory, and I'm here to pay a debt of gratitude to all of you who helped elect a president who I know will make America great again. And you know, it's a particular honor for me to be with you here tonight. My relationship with AIPAC spans more than a quarter of a century. It began with the mentoring role of Indiana's Hart Haston in my life back in 1988 as a first-time candidate for Congress. After I arrived in Washington, D.C. in 2001, it continued through my friendship with Marshall Cooper and others in this great organization. During my tenure as a congressman, as governor of Indiana, members of AIPAC were there with friendship and support and prayers. And let me just say, it's actually very hard for me to express before those friends of so many years the profound humility and gratitude I feel to stand before you tonight as the 48th Vice President of the United States of America. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. And it's the greatest honor of my life to serve as Vice President to President Donald Trump. I'm proud to call him my friend. I'm proud to call him my president, but honestly, I was never more proud than when at the outset of his very first joint address to Congress, President Trump paused to condemn threats and acts of vandalism against Jewish communities across America. He reminded us boldly that, quote, while we may be a nation divided on policies, we are a country that stands united in condemning hate and evil in all its very ugly forms. And President Donald Trump is a man of his word. And he's a man of action. For the first time in a long time, America has a president who will stand with our allies and stand up to our enemies. And under President Donald Trump, if the world knows nothing else, the world will know this: America stands with Israel. President Trump and I stand with Israel for the same reason every freedom-loving American stands with Israel. Because her cause is our cause. Her values are our values. And her fight is our fight. And President Trump is a lifelong friend of Israel. I've seen it firsthand, the president's deep affection for Israel and all who cherish her. It was the morning after the election. I was in the room when Prime Minister Netanyahu called to congratulate the president on that great victory. I heard President Trump express his unwavering support for Israel and the Jewish people, support he would reiterate last month when he welcomed the Prime Minister to the White House to reaffirm the enduring bond between our nations and our peoples. As President Trump said then, America's alliance with Israel is, quote, remarkably strong. But in his usual style, he said he is confident that it will be even stronger and reach even greater heights. Now, for my part, my Christian upbringing compels me to cherish Israel. The songs of the land and the people of Israel were the anthems of my youth. My wife and I had the privilege of visiting Israel in 2004 and again in 2008, and we fulfilled a lifelong dream to bring all three of our children to the Holy Land in December of 2014. Let me say from my heart, as for me and my house, we pray for the peace of Jerusalem and all who call her home. And I say with confidence to all gathered here, President Trump and I stand without apology for Israel, and we always will. I mean, just look at the actions President Trump has taken since he took office. Like when he named Governor Nikki Haley to be America's ambassador to the United Nations. As you'll hear tomorrow night, Ambassador Haley is already fighting tirelessly to end the one-sided actions at the UN that unfairly target Israel. And under President Trump, the United States will no longer allow the United Nations to be used as a forum for invective against Israel or the West. Or how about when President Trump named David Friedman to represent the United States of America in Israel? David is an unabashed advocate for a stronger Israel-America relationship, and our friendship will be stronger after he gets sworn in as ambassador. And I got to tell you, I just can't wait. This week it will be my high honor to administer the oath of office to Ambassador David Friedman. And know this, after decades of simply talking about it, the President of the United States is giving serious consideration to moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. But let me be clear. President Trump is also invested in finding an equitable and just solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Just a few weeks ago, the President dispatched Jason Greenblatt, his special representative for international negotiations, to visit Israel and the Palestinian territories and to bring a message that President Trump is committed to forging a lasting peace in the Middle East. Just last week, Jason hosted a senior Israeli delegation led by Prime Minister Netanyahu's chief of staff to continue these discussions. And while there will undoubtedly have to be compromises, I can assure you all, President Trump will never compromise the safety and security of the Jewish state of Israel. Now, since its founding, the Israeli people have awed the world with their strength of will and their strength of character. And at all times, in war and in peace, the Jewish people have held their heads high. It's because of their valor and their vitality that Israel thrives, a beacon of freedom and prosperity for all the world to see. Every day, in every way, the Jewish people's dignity rebukes all who would condemn them, not for what they do wrong, but for what they do right. And President Trump has made it clear. America stands alongside Israel as friends and as allies, and together we will confront those enemies who threaten our people and all that we hold dear. I'm proud to say today America's support for Israel's security is at a record level. And President Trump has made it absolutely clear. Our commitment to Israel's defense is non-negotiable. Not now, not ever. In fact, my fellow Americans, we have a president who is already busy rebuilding our military, restoring the arsenal of democracy, and we will once again provide our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guard with the resources and training they need to accomplish their mission, protect our families, and defend our allies. And in President Trump, America has a leader who will call our enemies by their name. Just last week in London, in the shadow of Parliament, radical Islamic terrorism reared its ugly head, claiming the lives of innocent civilians, including an American. At this very moment, our administration is crafting plans to defeat radical Islamic terrorism so it can no longer bring violence to our enemies, to our allies, or inspire violence here at home. And let me be clear, President Trump is working with our military, and the American people can know this. We will hunt down and destroy ISIS at its source so it can no longer threaten our people, our allies, or our most cherished ally, Israel. And finally, under President Donald Trump, America will stand strong in the face of the leading state sponsor of terrorism. This administration has put Iran on notice. America will no longer tolerate Iran's efforts to destabilize the region and jeopardize Israel's security. The Ayatollahs in Tehran openly admit their desire to wipe Israel off the map and drive its people into the sea. For decades, Iran has funneled weapons and cash to terrorists in Lebanon, Syria, and the Gaza Strip. They've gone to great lengths to develop nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. And due to the disastrous end of nuclear-related sanctions under the Iran deal, they now have additional resources to devote to sowing chaos and imperiling Israel. So let me be clear. Under President Donald Trump, the United States of America will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon. This is our solemn promise to you, to Israel, and to the world. History attests that enmity toward the Jewish people often turns from evil thought to evil action. My family and I paused to reflect on this truth of history just over a month ago while I was representing the United States in Munich, Germany. After attending the security conference, my family and I traveled to the first Nazi concentration camp in Dachau. I'd been there as a young man, but Karen and I wanted our daughter to see it too. We arrived at the camp in an early morning fog, and we were accompanied on our tour by Abbe Noer, a 93-year-old Holocaust survivor who had been imprisoned in Dachau as a 17-year-old boy. As we walked through the camp, Abbe described to me the hellish life he endured, toiling away as a slave, while those around him were taken away, one by one, never to return. And then he stopped, looked up at me with tears in his eyes, and said words I'll never forget. He said, "Then the Americans came." I was so proud. Those words underscored the imperative of American strength, and they powerfully remind us of the immutable bond between our people and the people of Israel. Under President Trump's leadership, America will be strong, stronger than ever before. And as the President said not long ago, our nation's friendship with Israel will grow even stronger. Together, we will reach even greater heights to the benefit of our two peoples and the world. We stand with Israel today and every day because our bond was knit millennia ago in the finery of faith. Over the mantle of our home, since the year I was first elected to Congress, are framed words that have long inspired our little family. We had them in our home in a small town in Indiana. We had them in the governor's residence. And now they're displayed over the mantle in the home of the Vice President of the United States. They come from the book of Jeremiah, and they read, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." These words are as true today as they were in millennia past, and they should give us, all of us, renewed hope that even in these troubled times of widening challenges and unknowable threats, that our bond is unbreakable and our future is bright. And I know with all of my heart that with your help, with God's help, and with the strong leadership of President Donald Trump, our nations and our peoples will remain forever friends, and we will go forth together to meet the glorious future that awaits. Thank you. God bless you. God bless Israel, and God bless the United States of America.
A Senate panel will look into how sexual assaults against young athletes are investigated. Witnesses include several former gymnasts and a representative from the U.S. Olympic Committee. That's live tomorrow from the Judiciary Committee at 10 a.m. Eastern on C-SPAN 3. You can also watch online at cspan.org or listen on the free C-SPAN radio app. Later, a House committee considers legislation that would require the Treasury Secretary to provide President Trump's tax returns and other financial information from 2006 to 2015. That's live from the House Ways and Means Committee at 4 p.m. Eastern, also on C-SPAN 3. Attorney General Jeff Sessions said the Justice Department is following through on an executive order to withhold federal grants from so-called sanctuary cities, which are places where local law enforcement limit their cooperation with federal authorities on immigration enforcement. Attorney General Sessions spoke to reporters at the White House briefing.
The Department of Justice has a duty to enforce our nation's laws, including our immigration laws. Those laws require us to promptly remove aliens when they are convicted or detained of certain crimes. The vast majority of American people support this common sense requirement. According to one recent poll, 80% of Americans believe that cities that arrest illegal immigrants for crimes should be required to turn them over to immigration authorities. Unfortunately, some states and cities have adopted policies designed to frustrate this enforcement of immigration laws. This includes refusing to detain known felons under federal detainer request or otherwise failing to comply with these laws. For example, the Department of Homeland Security recently issued a report showing that in a single week, there were more than 200 instances of jurisdictions refusing to honor ICE detainer requests with respect to individuals charged or convicted of a serious crime. The charges and convictions against these aliens include drug trafficking, hit and run, rape, sex offenses against a child, and even murder. Such policies cannot continue. They make our nation less safe by putting dangerous criminals back on the streets. We all remember the tragic case of Kate Steinle, the 32-year-old woman who was shot and killed 2 years ago in San Francisco as she walked along a pier with her father. The shooter, Francisco Sanchez, was an illegal immigrant who had already been deported 5 times and had 7 felony convictions. Just 11 weeks before the shooting, San Francisco had released Sanchez from its custody, even though Immigrations and Customs Enforcement officers had filed a detainer requesting that he be held in custody until immigration authorities could pick him up for removal. Even worse, Sanchez admitted the only reason he came to San Francisco was because it was a sanctuary city. A similar story unfolded just last week whenever Valles, an illegal immigrant and a Mexican national, was charged with murder and robbery of a man at a light rail station. Valles was released from a Denver jail in late December, despite the fact that ICE had lodged a detainer for his removal. The American people are not happy with these results. They know that when cities and states refuse to help enforce immigration laws, our nation is less safe. Failure to deport aliens who are convicted of criminal offenses puts whole communities at risk, especially immigrant communities in the very sanctuary jurisdictions that seek to protect the perpetrators. DUIs, assaults, burglaries, drug crimes, gang rapes, crimes against children, and murderers. Countless Americans would be alive today, and countless loved ones would not be grieving today if these policies of sanctuary cities were ended. Not only do these policies endanger lives of every American, just last May, the Department of Justice Inspector General found that these policies also violate federal law. The President has rightly said disregard for law must end. In his executive order, he stated that it is the policy of the executive branch to ensure that states and cities comply with all federal laws, including all immigration laws. Today, I'm urging states and local jurisdictions to comply with these federal laws, including 8 U.S.C. Section 1373. Moreover, the Department of Justice will require that jurisdictions seeking or applying for Department of Justice grants to certify compliance with 1373 as a condition of receiving those awards. This policy is entirely consistent with the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs guidance that was issued just last summer under the previous administration. This guidance requires state and local jurisdictions to comply and certify compliance with Section 1373 in order to be eligible for OJP grants. It also made clear that failure to remedy violations could result in withholding grants, termination of grants, and disbarment or ineligibility for future grants. The Department of Justice will also take all lawful steps to claw back any funds awarded to a jurisdiction that willfully violates 1373. In the current fiscal year, Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs and Community-Oriented Policing Services anticipates awarding more than $4.1 billion in grants. I strongly urge our nation's states and cities and counties to consider carefully the harm they are doing to their citizens by refusing to enforce our immigration laws and to rethink these